You might notice that, for those of you who can see it, that today's sermon is Romans 8, the greatest news. And this really is a good description of this chapter. Romans 8 is perhaps one of the most, if not the most important passage in all the letters that were written to the church. There's so much that is contained with it, so much that is important to hear, but the reason why it is so great is because it lays out clearly what salvation really is, who God really is. It explains to us his power, his love, his grace, his mercy. It tells us about the connection that we have with God and why we have it and who we have it through and how we're connected. It is in this passage that it is made clear that we are not saved because of what we do, but we are saved because of who God is. This passage is the greatest news. I read something as I was getting ready for this passage where I found another pastor who was writing about this, and he talked about a TV show that I have watched many times, especially back when I was in college, and it's called Futurama. It's about this guy who accidentally falls into a cryogenic chamber now, in this day and age, and then wakes up accidentally 2,000 years or 5,000 years, or I forget how long in the future, and the world is completely changed. You know, there are people like all the famous celebrities of today, they're going around as heads in jars that float around because they could afford to have that kind of thing done. There are aliens, there are all these weird things, and it's all about him trying to make sense of this change in place. And so he gets a job. This guy who was a pizza delivery guy gets a job, a really futuristic job where he's a delivery guy between planets. And his boss so often comes and he says, "Good news, everybody." And this pastor made the connection that the way this guy delivers good news is often the way we hear good news delivered here, where it's, "Good news, you miserable cretins. You're all in big trouble." Because the guy will come in and he'll say, "Good news, you've got to go deliver summonses to the court to the mob planet." That's not good news. That's the opposite of good news, having to go to the mob with the summons for court. I don't want to do that. But Romans 8 is such good news. Paul, he starts out the book by giving us warnings about if you do all these things, you're going to be in danger. And then he gets to this chapter, especially this passage. And he says, all that stuff I told you before, well, guess what? Good news. Good news if you are part of God's elect. Good news if you are part of God's family. And there's so many ways. I'm honestly not sure that I can fit them all in this week. I'm watching my time if need be. I'm going to go ahead and continue this next week. So we'll see how it goes. But it starts out very simply with this part in the beginning where he says that the Spirit helps us in our weakness. He says, likewise. Now, Paul has just finished talking about how the Spirit fills us and calls us, how the Spirit helps us as we anticipate and wait for the return of God and the redemption of all things. And he says, how the Spirit's doing all that stuff. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. For we do not know what to pray as we ought. I want to ask how many people have had that experience. You know you need to pray. You can feel how badly you need to pray, and you don't know what to pray. How many of you have felt like that tax collector, right? In the Gospels, where the Pharisee stood up and was saying his prayers, and this tax collector came up to the front, fell on his knees, didn't know what else except to pound his chest and to say, God, forgive me, a sinner. How many of you have felt like that? Forgive me, God, for being a sinner. I don't know what else to pray. Or, God, there's a situation in my life or in a person's life. I don't have the words. God, help. God, help. I don't know what to say. I'm sure I'd be surprised if there's anybody who's an adult who hasn't had that feeling. It's probably possible, but I'd be surprised. But he says, likewise, the Spirit helps you in your weakness. The Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Think about this. The Spirit that we are filled with, as we know we are because of what we believe about baptism, right? The Spirit fills us, dwells within our hearts. That's what he told the Corinthians in a letter long ago, even though it comes after this in the Bible. Corinthians was written first. He tells them about how they're built together like a church because the Spirit fills them and unites them, right? And then he says, that Spirit intercedes for you with prayers that are so deep there are no words. Sermons, prayers that are so deep that all there is a sense of groaning to express what is there. That's what the Spirit does for us. And then he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. Okay, so the Spirit's in you, praying prayers that are so deep there are no words, there are only groanings, only these feelings, these emotions. And then the one who can see into the hearts, the Father, he comes and he sees and he understands the Spirit because, not just because he's God, but because he has the Spirit doing that. Because he and the Spirit are one. So that means that the Father who hears the Spirit is filled by the Spirit being present in you. Start to see what Paul is telling us. You are given the gift of God's presence in your life. You are given the filling, not just of one member of the Trinity, but of all the Trinity. God's home. Right? We were told in the Old Testament that God's home was the tabernacle, the temple. That was meant to be his dwelling place here on earth. He would come to dwell on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant, above the altar where the sacrifices were made. But then the temple curtain was torn, the temple was torn down. So where is it that God dwells now? He no longer hides himself behind the curtain, between the wings of the seraph on a box of gold. Now, he dwells on the altar of your heart and your mind. He dwells between the beginning of your emotions and the ends of your thoughts. He lives, brothers and sisters, in you. You are his home. He has made for himself a new house, built of his family, built by his actions, not by the hands of men. You are his home. You are his family. Think about that. Think about the fact that the God who made everything chose you to be his home, his family. He doesn't care where you have come from. He doesn't care what it is that you have done before this. He doesn't care what it is that you're going to do after that. Well, maybe that's a little bit. He does care, but not so much that he's going to cut you off, not so much that he's going to leave you. He cares more that you are a part of his family than whether or not you are perfect by yourself in every way as you are. He can give you what you lack. And he is indeed in the process of doing so. This is just the first couple of verses of this passage, where Paul tells us that we are filled by God. We are chosen by him. And now comes what many people think is the best part of this passage, knowing that God is with us, so much so that he hears our thoughts, knows our thoughts. Even when we do not know them, he knows them. Listen, brothers and sisters, listen. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. All things. This relates to what Paul says about suffering leading to hope which does not fail. Right? This is part of that. All things, brothers and sisters. All things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. Now, I want you to notice a couple things about this one verse. Number one is that good things, those things meant for evil, all work together for good. This is telling us once more about the power of God. I was thinking about this passage last night as I was driving home from my in-laws. And I thought about things that are completely, in many ways, unrelated to the main idea of the sermon. I'm not going to go into them, except one thought that I had. The purpose of the Old Testament. Now, of course, there are multiple purposes for the Old Testament, right? It informs us about historical things. It teaches us about righteousness. It does all these different things. But one thing every single mark of the Old Testament does is it points us towards Jesus Christ. Every single little bit of the Old Testament, ultimately, at the very foundational level, prepares the way, points us towards Jesus Christ. And that's found in this. Think about how many terrible things happened in the Old Testament. How many things people meant for evil? Right? The serpent. You really can't get much sooner than that, because really before that it was just God doing God things. The serpent meant something for evil. And what did God do with that thing that the serpent meant for evil? He used it to lead to Jesus Christ, that we might be united with God in a completely different way. Cain and Abel. Cain meant to kill his brother for evil. And what did God use that for? He used it to show us his mercy. And that even when we deserve death, he's still willing to be forgiving to us. There may be a punishment that we receive, but he is still willing to be merciful. I can go on with more things. Right? David and Bathsheba. What David did to Uriah, what he did with Bathsheba, he meant for an evil purpose. And what did God use that for? He used that to show that there is always the possibility for redemption in even the most terrible of circumstances. Now, the thing that I think is the biggest one in all of this is Joseph and his brothers. This is the clearest example in all of the Old Testament. Joseph's brother meant it for an evil purpose. When they sold their brother into slavery, told his father that he was dead, and left it at that. And God took that moment, and he used it to show that even when you are enslaved, he will come along and bring you freedom in a way that should not happen. He will free you from that slavery. He will lift you up above those who did enslave you. And that he will use you to then bring salvation to others. This is the story of Jesus Christ and of every Christian in history. Enslaved to sin, that's our story. We are enslaved to sin before we are baptized. And then after baptized, we are lifted up and set above even the angels. And from that place, we then are used by God to share his word, to tell others about the forgiveness, the mercy, the grace, the hope, the love that God has, so that they too can follow the path that Jesus laid to free them from slavery, that they might join us above the angels. And in Jesus, he came as a man. And that which was meant for evil, those who were enslaved to sin, they killed him, meaning to put to death the hope that God had brought. And instead, they fulfilled God's purpose, just like Joseph's brothers did, that many more people might be freed, that many more people might have life rather than death. All things work together for good. Perhaps there is nothing we need to hear more now. I don't know what's going to be happening in the upcoming months. I've seen so many videos of people being bloodied and beaten. Oftentimes, they're minority business owners trying to protect their businesses from the people who are rioting, not the protesters. I know some people who've been doing that, and they have been doing it very quietly, which is why they never make the news. But I don't know what's going to be happening. I don't know how much more violence we can stand. Portland now at 58 days straight of rioting. But what I can tell you is that all these things that other people mean for evil, God will be able to use them for good. God will be able to use them, and we may not see it right away. It may take time, but ultimately, God can take these things and will take them and use them for his purpose, whether we see it now in our lifetime or whether we see it some other day or our children see it. I don't know. But I know that God will take all these things and use them for good. And that leads us to one more question about this. How can it be good when we see people losing their lives? Throughout the history of the church, we've seen brothers and sisters killed. As it says a little bit later on here in the passage, for your sake we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. The good that is being worked towards here, brothers and sisters, is the good according to the purpose of God. Right? For those who are called according to his purpose. Ultimately, the good that is being worked towards is for us. For those who are being led to the slaughter like lambs. Who are being killed every day across the world. This week I saw that there were 5 men in Nigeria killed because they refused to recant their belief in Jesus Christ. They had a video up. I didn't watch the video. But I saw the people behind them, had the men kneeling, and I know what they did to them. How can that be good? Because ultimately, those 5 men bore witness to the last of the true God. Those 5 men bore witness to the very end of their belief in the resurrection. That is God's purpose. That we would live these lives boldly and without fear. Because we know in our hearts, we know in our minds that he will resurrect us. This morning, as we were walking up the stairs, one of the boys looked at the poster we had downstairs, and he said, "Papa, is that really true?" I said, "What?" He said, "That word perish there. Is that really true? That those who believe in Jesus will not perish, but will have everlasting life?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, what does perish mean?" I said, "It means die." I said, in this case, what it means that even people, when they die, if they believe in Jesus, they don't really die. They're resurrected. Those 5 brothers of ours, those 5 Nigerian men, they've been resurrected, brothers and sisters. Their ending here to us and their families was painful. But for them, it was the beginning of truly knowing joy, happiness, love, of finally getting to that point of having a life that is more real than anything we can imagine. Now, I don't want to encourage any of you to try to rush to that place. Don't pray that it comes sooner rather than later. For to live is Christ and to die is gain, as Paul tells us. So living now, we're able to serve and love and care for others. But brothers and sisters, do not forget that you have been called to be part of God's family. And that because of that, all things, even those things which seem horrible, that seem the worst, are working together for God's purpose for you. That you will be saved, that you will be resurrected, that you will be a part of his family. Good news. Good news. God is dwelling in you because you are the ones that he called to be his family. I don't think I can end quite yet this week. Let's do this last little bit. Because you have been called. Now, I want to ask you a question. When you call somebody, is it involuntary? I mean, when a kid gets in pain, he might cry out, "Mama, Papa," or something like that, right? But really, in general, if you call somebody, the important thing to know here is that that is intentional. So Paul says here, for those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among any brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. In Jesus Christ's high priestly prayer, he talks about those you have given to me. Everyone who believes in Jesus Christ was given to him by the Father. It wasn't just like, okay, Jesus, go see who you can attract. Go see who you can convince, can charm. It was, all right, Jesus, go out there and I will send people to you. Go out there and I, the Father, will make them come to you, will bring people to you whom I have chosen. And that's where we hear in Ephesians 1:4, one of the most important verses in the Bible. You were chosen in Jesus Christ before the foundations of the world were laid. Before God made this world, he had chosen you. Before he spoke the first word of let there be light, he had chosen you to be his children, to be his family, to be his home. You have been chosen for as long as God was God, beyond our understanding of time. And for those people that he chose, he then calls us. And when he calls us, he justifies us. And that means he makes us right before him. That word means that when he calls us and chooses us, he says, I will no longer consider you to be a sinner. You are no longer a sinner in my eyes and my heart. You are my child, my beloved family. You are part of me now. And for those that he does that to, that he justifies, he also glorifies. And that's why it says that we who are chosen, those whom he foreknow and predestined, he conformed to the image of his Son, in order that Jesus might be the firstborn among many. You see, brothers and sisters, the way that Jesus Christ was resurrected is the way that we will be resurrected. So we who are called according to his purpose, we who are called according to that purpose will be resurrected, because that is his purpose, that we would become more like Jesus Christ, that we would be given those glorified, resurrected bodies, that we would come to live in a manner that is holy and righteous, that we would have the law written on our hearts and minds, that we wouldn't need to practice it, but that we would live it. that we would live by love in his household as his family, and that what happened to Jesus Christ, he was but the first. The rest of us are to follow. The rest of us will be his family. And so we are glorified. I love the way that the Orthodox refer to this. They want to make it clear, and they say that we will be, with a lowercase g, I know I've told probably all of you this many times, we will be little gods, because God shares some portion of himself. Not enough to make us actually God, but to make us actually his family. He gives us holiness, he gives us righteousness, and he makes us free from sin, so that in those ways we really can be the image of the invisible God. From the very beginning, we are image bearers of the Creator, because we are able to think and feel, because we are able to make choices. And then God will complete that picture in the resurrection, when he makes us holy and righteous and makes it possible for us to choose holiness without fail, to choose righteousness without ever a stumble, and to choose love, real love, God's love, not the love that we're told about in this world, or the love that we hear about in the media and movies and TV shows, but real love, the love of God. That's what we will get on that day. So, brothers and sisters, this is our good news so far, that God lives with us, is in us completely. He chose us to be his family, to be his dwelling place, to be his household, and that in doing so, he is leading us no matter what terrible things happen, no matter what kinds of horrible things other people mean for evil. He is leading us to a resurrected life where we will be holy and righteous, living in glorified bodies, free from any pain or sorrow, knowing only joy and love. If that isn't good news, I don't know what is. And let me reiterate one more time that he is willing to give these things to you regardless of what your past is. Being a member of a certain family doesn't matter. Living in a certain village or part of town or anywhere doesn't matter. Speaking a particular language doesn't matter. What sins you have committed doesn't matter. He will forgive you, accept you, welcome you, love you, help you to change, and lead you on to glory. What matters isn't who you are. What matters isn't what you've done or where you've come from. What matters is who Jesus Christ is, what he has done, and where he is leading us. Brothers and sisters, hear this good news. Let it dwell in your heart and in your mind. Let it fill you daily. And let it be that which leads you on day by day. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, amen.